Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? I'm good. I'm great. We are going to dive into Robert Hoffman's book, Kate Gosselin, How She Fooled the World. And I told you that a couple days ago I got a message from somebody that um, used to do some investigation into Kate back in the day when the show was still in its peak and its height in early, I don't even know, 2000s, mid 2000, like 2009, 2010, that kind of time. And they directed me to some content related to the divorce that I actually thought was kind of interesting and sort of corresponded or correlated to some of the statements that Jon Gosselin has made on recently in the media with the Daily Mail. So if you are brand new or have been under a rock, basically Jon Gosselin spoke with the Daily Mail TV last week and said that after 10 years, a gag order that had been placed by TLC and Kate to keep him silent had been lifted, and so he could finally talk about aspects of his marriage and his divorce that he had been prohibited from talking about. And one of the allegations that he made was that TLC actually was in the middle of their divorce, fabricated headlines, and offered to pay him $1 million to stay married to Kate in order to keep the money train of Kate plus 8 going. At the time, Kate plus 8 or Kate and Jon plus 8 was making TLC around $186 million every quarter, and their ratings on average were around 11.2 to 11.4, which is ridiculous if you think about it. This was a time where there was no competition at all for reality TV, and so with their marriage imploding, TLC was doing everything they could to try to keep the marriage intact and together. And so somebody that was connected to it showed me a very old blog that was written, and I actually thought this was kind of interesting, and I think it'll help us sort of start this, and then we'll go through some of the pages of the chapter about the divorce from the book, and then at the end of this I'll link Robert's book in here, which you can purchase on Kindle, I think for like $8. So, and I've also put out an email to Robert to see if he might want to talk in the future. So I'm working on it. Oh, and I reached out to Aunt Jody on Facebook. So I sent her a message to see if she might want to talk. She was adamant and very vocal about her displeasure with the network, with Kate and Jon, and Kate has since sort of removed herself or removed her family, Kevin and Jody, from her lives, and so Jody, who used to be on the show with them, and Kevin are no longer a part of their lives. So here is what was said in the old blog. So it says, when Jon and Kate Gosselin were splitting up, Jon went to a local marriage counselor to save his marriage. Kate refused to attend and instead got Dr. Phil McGraw to invite Jon to Los Angeles to a studio in which Jon was cajoled and was offered no psychological marriage saving, but instead Phil pled with Jon to save the brand, to lie to the public that they were still happily married to keep the show going. Phil didn't care that Jon had narcissistic personality disorder and was abusing and exploiting her kids and deceiving the public. No, he only wanted to save the $186 million TLC Gosselin brand. That's despicable. Phil only cared about money. So this is actually an article about sort of all of the bad TV doctors, but an example of what they say happened when they attempted to go to marriage counseling. Now, it's interesting because this is old, so this was written a long time ago, but it actually corresponds to what Jon has actually recently just said to the Daily Mail, in that he attempted to go to marriage counseling. He suggested it, and then he would show up and Kate wouldn't be there. And then when Kate arranged for them to go to marriage counseling, he went and she wasn't there. He didn't say who the marriage counseling was with. According to that source, it was with Dr. Phil, who apparently didn't do anything but try to persuade him to stay with Kate for the sake of the show. Now, this also ties back to what Robert Hoffman found through emails and through electronic documents, through divorce information, through statements that were submitted by attorneys, through emails by attorneys for both Kate and Jon, and through emails from the network to Kate and Jon. So in the book, it basically talks about how, as the marriage was imploding, Kate had been doing a bunch of speaking engagements at churches. And Jon decided that he no longer wanted to attend the church speaking events with Kate. And once he decided that he no longer wanted to do these speaking arrangements, and for some of these speaking engagements, they were charging upwards of $25,000. And that's how Robert Hoffman alleges the marriage kind of just implodes, because Jon is no longer wanting to participate in the machine of Kate and Jon plus 8. Kate sort of like loses interest. And then there's a lot of allegations in the book as well that Kate's relationship with her bodyguard, Steve, also played a role in the demise of their marriage. Jon believed that Kate was having an affair, although had no proof to show otherwise. Like, he didn't have anything proven, but there was a lot of documented evidence of tons of trips that these two took, where he didn't necessarily have to be on these trips, where they would spend nights together, where they would go out for dinner privately by themselves, even though they were with the kids. Lots of reasons that Jon believed that Kate was involved with Steve. And Kate started inviting Steve to like the holiday events. Now, she has always denied that there was an affair, and for Robert Hoffman's part said Jon was never able to prove it, but Jon said that he could tell by the way that they looked at each other that they were romantically involved. So that's been this one piece of the puzzle that people have always talked about. Was there an affair? Was there not an affair? According to Jon, he thinks there was. Steve and Kate say there wasn't. So there's that. So as everything is sort of falling apart in their marriage, what happens is that they allege that a marriage contract was actually offered. And so Kate told Jon, after like he stopped agreeing to go on all of these speaking engagements with her, that he could date whoever he wanted and do whatever he wanted to do on non-filming days, as long as he was in front of the cameras and crew on time and on town, and they could have like an open marriage. And she said Kate's brother Kevin and Jody actually spoke about a contract during interviews, and they said, all we know is that Jon told us that Kate came to him with a contract saying that he could have girlfriends and that he could do his own thing. In exchange, Jon needs to show up for filming, but otherwise he has the freedom certain days to do whatever he wants, which is similar to what Jon recently just alleged in the media, saying that he was offered a contract to stay married for $1 million for 2 more years. So this is all kind of starting to line up, and it's interesting that with the gag order lifted, some of the things that he's saying are actually in this book, and they verify each other. So I always like when that kind of happens. So he said that Jon went along with the plan for a while, and he laid low and he did stuff, but then he found his biggest thing was that he wanted to get out of the contract with TLC, and he wanted to stop filming because it got to a point in their marriage that they started disagreeing about the direction of the kids. And Kate wanted to keep filming, and Jon wanted to get his kids off camera and let them have a more normal childhood, which is, again, very comparable to what he told the Daily Mail TV. So he finds this termination clause where it says that he could be fired for anything from making disparaging remarks to insubordination to dishonesty to intoxication or failure to perform services or failure to conduct himself with due regard to social conventions or public morals or decency, and for actions that bring family to public disrepute and contempt, scandal, or ridicule. And so if you remember, what the book is saying is that Jon finds this clause, and then he realizes that if he starts acting out, going out, drinking, being drunk, being sort of off-brand for what TLC wanted, Jon believed that if he did these things, he could get fired. What ends up happening is that these scandals that he's doing, where he's publicly intoxicated, hanging out with other women, doing stuff to be seen in a certain light to get fired ends up backfiring for him, because they ultimately spin it in a way that they say that he was philandering, he was turned into somebody different overnight, he was stealing money, he was out drinking all the time, he was cheating on her, but they were already split up. It's kind of interesting when you kind of go back in time and see how it all plays out. And so he still has a hard time. They're still not firing him. He's trying to do just about anything from a social standpoint to get TLC to get him off the air. Then in 2010, he writes a tweet that says, "Due to the overwhelming amount of questions, statements, false statements in the media, I would like to clarify a few things. First and foremost, for people who did not watch Kate and Nate, Jon and Kate plus 8, I stated years ago and on television that I no longer wanted to film and wanted my privacy back. This was not a decision I made lightly or without weighing all of the factors involved. The negative effects on my family has my great concern and far outweigh any monetary gain we received." The kids are much older than when we first started. They are acutely aware of their life is markedly different than their peers. They are 6 and 10 and have to deal with paparazzi. They can't visit a public place without a crowd gathering or people snapping pictures on their cell phones. Whether the children want to film or not is completely irrelevant. Children rely on the guidance of the adults to ensure their best interests. Left to their own, most children would not eat properly, visit the dentist, or complete homework. Do you think a child would choose a day on the beach instead of school? Is this the best thing for them? Is it the child's decision to make? Of course not. I am acutely aware of the mistakes I made in 2009, and I'm ashamed of the choices I made. I have apologized to Kate, my family, and my friends, though through counseling, and I have learned to my own actions. My goal is to move forward in a positive direction. Lastly, my children have experienced a lot of life changes in the short period of time: new home, new school, parents' divorce, increased media attention, and much more. So he does this statement again, and he's doing it sort of to disparage the network, to disparage, his image. And again, TLC will not fire him. And so he ends up getting into a breach of contract, right? Lawsuit where he eventually loses and has to pay a certain amount of money, and because they will not fire him, even though he's broken that termination clause so many different ways. So as the network determines that they are not able to actually keep the family together, negotiations start to happen between Jon and Kate related to the divorce. And this is where things get interesting, because according to the book, Jon and Kate initially agreed that Jon would file for divorce because somebody actually has to file for divorce, even though it's a mutual decision, right? And so Jon decides that he's going to divorce, and the lawyers start exchanging dialogues about what the public statement is going to be related to the divorce. But before they even do that, TLC is demanding that they sit down and do an interview on TV and talk about the divorce, and they wanted them to answer these questions. How did you tell the kids? How are they doing? How will this change your day-to-day? Where will the kids live? Will you move from the house? Where are you living? Have you already been separated? Was it earlier than reported? You renewed your vows in Hawaii. Was that real? Did you consider marriage counseling or therapy? Will the series continue, and how? Will you be stronger and happier apart? What will the arrangement be? Blah, blah, blah. So they had to answer all these questions. And initially, neither one of them wanted to do it because they didn't want to have to put this all out on display. Eventually, they answer a sort of dribbled down version of those questions through negotiations between their managers and the network. Now, as they're starting to work through the actual divorce process, Jon's attorney sends a draft of a statement to Kate's team, which says, Jon and Kate have mutually decided to move forward with their lives in Pennsylvania. One of the parties has to be the one to file for divorce, and it was decided that Jon would do so. The allegations in the divorce complaint filed by Jon merely are a formality, and Kate has or shortly will be filing an answer admitting to those allegations. The parties will continue to do
Mommy,
yeah?
please offer a release.
Okay, I'll go get her, okay?
Even off of her collar.
Okay. The parties will continue to do everything they can to be good parents to the children and put the children's well-being above and everything else, and to support the other party as the parent to the children. So he sends this part of it to the attorneys, and he sent Julie May the same statement, who's part of the network, and they go back and forth and change allegations to statements, and they start going back and forth. And at this point, it says Jon and Kate had mutually decided that Jon would be the one to actually file for divorce. But then on June 18th, after these statements start going back and forth, the network starts getting concerned that the divorce filing would mess up what had already been recorded for the series. And so, Vaughn, I will go get them in a second, okay? I'm filming.
No, she already jumped the fence.
Okay, I'll go get her in a second, okay? Julie said the network was worried that the announcement on the show wouldn't match the press reports about the filing, and that the show would be outdated when the news broke. So, and what they end up doing is that they craft a statement that's completely separate, because in the press now, it's showing that Jon is cheating, and it is showing that Jon's philandering, and Kate is heartbroken, because that's what they were doing from TLC's side of things. Even though they were already separated, TLC was sort of fueling this idea, and Kate, that Jon was cheating, even though they were already separated and working towards the divorce. So they end up changing it, and it says, this afternoon, Kate filed for divorce. Our kids are still my number one priority. I love them, and I want to make sure they stay happy, healthy, and safe. My job is being the best, most supportive, and loving father that I can be to my kids, and not being married to Kate doesn't change that. This will be a difficult transition for all of us, but Kate and I will work it out, our schedules, which enables our kids to have plenty of quality time with both of us at home in Pennsylvania. In terms of my marriage, it's no secret that the past 6 months have been very difficult for Kate and me. We are no different than any other couple and parents who are facing crossroads in the marriage, and I am, of course, deeply saddened that we are divorcing. So they allege that all of this was done because they determined that Jon was a liability, and TLC, he didn't want to film anymore. And so TLC knew that Kate wanted to film, and so they ended up joining ranks with Kate to continue the franchise, and they would do it with Kate instead of with Jon. And so what they did was, by aligning with Kate, they changed the entire narrative of the divorce, not to being one of it being a mutual decision, and knowing that any sort of interactions that Jon had with women was not infidelity, but rather they were already separated, into, we need to make a sympathetic storyline about Kate, which shows Jon as a cheater and a stealer. And so these statements start going out. Jon's camp doesn't even know about it. People magazine responds by saying, I didn't know they were going to make a statement. Discovery, basically, Robert Hoffman alleges that they controlled the situation from the top all the way to the bottom. And it got to a point where Charlie, Jon's attorney, told Cheryl that it's interesting that the network had changed Kate's statements based on the fact that Jon was going to make a statement. He also said that Kate's statement was stronger than he was told it was going to be. And then Cheryl replied to Charlie saying, I thought so too. And so after all of this goes down, Charles' associate Kimberly, so Charlie is again Jon's attorney, sent another email to Jon and some other people involved, basically stating like that this was all going to be done in a certain way. But then everything completely changes, because suddenly photos appear online of Jon with, I think, Haley Glassman. And at that point, they decide to completely change it. They don't tell Jon anything. And this is what ultimately goes to People magazine. Over the course of the weekend, Jon's activities have left me no choice but to file procedures in order to protect myself and our children. While there are reasons why it was appropriate and necessary for me to initiate this proceeding, I do not wish to discuss this reason at this time, in the hope that all issues will be resolved amicably between Jon and myself. So they change the narrative that this was a surprise filing and a surprise split, which wasn't even the case. And then they amplify it by having Kate go on to Good Morning America and on the Today Show, where Kate basically accuses Jon of stealing money and her not being able to pay bills. However, according to Robert Hoffman's book, she had at least 10 accounts at that time with over a total value in each account of over $200,000. So while she's on the Today Show pretending she's poor and that Jon is cheating, which are both false, there's proof otherwise showing it. But all of this, they say, was created by TLC to garner sympathy for Kate, to continue the series so that Kate would look sympathetic in a divorce and they would smear Jon, making him look like the bad guy. And it was all because Jon didn't want to film anymore. Isn't that crazy? And then they provide evidence basically in showing that the original complaint drawn up and agreed to by the couple was this, with Jon listed as the plaintiff and Kate listed as the defendant. And it has the entire complaint in here. So it's like they completely fabricated the entire divorce to make Jon look bad. And then Kate just kept at it, and she went on interviews and she talked about Jon and what a cheater he was and all of this. And then Jon couldn't say a thing because he was bound by a contract with TLC. TLC had created this narrative and they had to stick to it. And then as the divorce goes final, they put him into a 10-year gag order where he can't talk about any of this. He just was able to talk about it, and now you can see in Robert Hoffman's book how it all went down. It's interesting that what he says completely matches what Robert Hoffman was able to uncover through documents. It's kind of disgusting if you think about it, how a network would get in the middle of a divorce and manipulate something in a way that actually causes strife and real life consequences to someone. Because if you think about it now, Jon wasn't cheating on her. He didn't steal money. But these are always the thoughts now that people have about Jon, is that he was cheating and then he stole money. But he didn't do either of those things, according to Robert Hoffman's book and the documents and the emails that are going back and forth, and a contract that Kevin and Jody talked about where he could have an open marriage. I mean, it's insane to think that TLC was able to create a false narrative that actually had real life impacts with Jon and made it hard for Jon to actually get a job, made it hard for Jon to have like any sort of fight in the divorce proceedings, and completely contaminated a marriage and divorce that ultimately has eroded a family. And now here we are all these years later, and they're still fighting about this stupid divorce. And it's like TLC's dirty little paw prints and Kate, because they wanted to make money, are all over it. And it's so disgusting to me. I mean, if this is how it all went down, I cannot even believe that this would be like true. I'm like, when I started reading this in the book, I was shocked. I was shocked. So I would like to know what you guys think. Are you surprised by this? I think like being the fact that it like matches what Jon said, and the fact that Robert has like actual like emails and documents that show what was going on. It's interesting. And it further sort of shows me like how motivated Kate was to stay in the limelight, to keep her kids working, despite the fact that another parent did not want to keep filming. And there was actually a clause in their contract that said that if one parent didn't want to go through and continue, they would stop. And somehow the network and Kate found a way to work around that, got him in a breach of contract, got him locked down to 10 years of silence, and now here we are today. So I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to know more about what your background is, and if you are shocked or not shocked, tell me in the comments below. Bye, guys.